Hi, I'm Brittany, a neurodivergent mum and speech pathologist. This is Not Just Theories, where I share what actually works in my real, messy life. Because life doesn't follow a theory. Here's what I actually do. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Not Just Theories. I'm Brittany. I'm a speech pathologist, neurodivergent parent, and someone who spends way too much time staring blankly into the fridge, trying to remember what I opened it for. Today's episode is one I've wanted to do for a while because it comes up a lot when I talk with other neurodivergent parents, and that is decision fatigue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it feels like, why it's extra intense for neurodivergent brains, although it is something that I think most parents I talk to definitely experience it, particularly if you're the default parent, which is usually the mum, but not always. But the most important thing I'm going to talk about today is some of the things that we can actually do about it. And I'm hoping that they're realistic and achievable things to try. So first of all, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what decision fatigue is in case you haven't heard about it. Basically, decision fatigue is what happens when your brain hits its choice limit. So it sort of gets to the point where like every option just feels hard and every task is feeling urgent, and really even tiny decisions like what mug are you going to use or what are you going to make for lunch can feel really impossible because you've just made so many choices already that making another choice just feels like you can't do it. So for neurodivergent brains, this limit tends to come earlier in the day or after fewer decisions because a lot of the time you're already working harder behind the scenes. So things like managing sensory input and masking and planning for our kids and navigating unpredictable routines and adjusting to changes and obviously also running on reduced sleep. So all of those things that are already going on can make it harder for you to make decisions. And the other thing is sometimes when you're neurodivergent, things feel like decisions to you that aren't decisions to other people. Like they just grab a mug out of the cupboard. It's not like an active choice to pick a particular mug or go, but if I use that mug now, then I'm going to have to wash it later and then I won't have it available for my next cup of tea. But actually I know that the feeling of that handle in my hand is more comforting. So I definitely want that available for me later. So I need to use a different mug now or I'm going to have to wash it. So just all of those little decisions that your brain can generate. Not everyone does that all the time. So you often are making a lot more decisions in a shorter period of time because some people apparently just run on autopilot and they just grab things and they don't even think about it. So if you're someone who puts a bit more thought into all of your decisions, you run out of energy and capacity much, much sooner. And by the time you get to halfway through the day, your tank's running on empty. So this is something that for me just sums up decision fatigue as a parent. And it's, that moment when your kids have gone down for a nap or they're, finally playing by themselves or something. And that you have this tiny window of time. You might have 15 minutes, you might have half an hour, it depends on your kid. And in theory, like, oh, this is brilliant, I could do anything. But in practice, your brain pulls up that immediate massive list of things that you could do, and you're sitting there thinking, well, I could make myself something to eat because I'm starving. I could have a quick shower because I feel gross. I could clean the kitchen because it's stressing me out every time I look at it. I could tidy the toys. I could put on the washing, or I could actually just rest because I'm exhausted. I've talked a little bit before about how I've now made the decision to rest. But before I did that, I would get to nap time and I'd know, I couldn't do all of those things on my list. And instead of just picking one thing, any of those one things that would have felt like I'd achieved something, I would just freeze. I would do nothing. I would sit there basically like dissociating or like scrolling my phone for 20 minutes. And then I would feel worse than if I'd just done any of those things on the list. So it's really common. I've spoken to so many parents who find themselves in that like decision fatigue moment where they're like, there's so many things I need to do during this time that I'm going to do none of it. I'm just going to sit here doing none of it. I'm going to feel guilty and awful because I'm not even resting effectively. I'm just dissociating. And so if that's you too, you're not lazy, you're not disorganized, you're not failing. Your brain is overwhelmed. It's doing its best, but it is exhausted. So hopefully you sort of understand what that decision fatigue is. And there are a couple of reasons that this is sort of a common thing, especially for neurodivergent parents, why it might hit them harder. And one is that we rely really heavily on predictable routines. So because predictability really reduces that cognitive load, but when something unexpected happens, like your child refusing to get dressed or someone spilling their milk or shoes not being where they're meant to be, that entire internal plan of how you wanted your day to go collapses and you feel like you're making hundreds of decisions on the fly rather than sort of having your pre-made decisions that you might have relied on pre-kids. So often as a parent, the coping strategies you had before kids stop working and you're just making all of these extra decisions because the things that you'd put in place to reduce your decisions have gone. Unexpected things happen all the time when you've got toddlers in the house, and I'm sure it happens with older kids as well. The other thing is that just parents in general, not just neurodivergent parents, make hundreds of decisions per day because you're making decisions not just for yourself, but you're making them for your kids as well. So you're making them on behalf of other people. So that sort of rapid fire decision making happens for all parents. There's also this big executive function load, and executive functioning tends to be something that a lot of neurodivergent parents struggle with, whether you've got ADHD or you're autistic. Things like planning and sequencing and shifting between tasks and prioritizing different things, your working memory, those are the areas that get overloaded when you're stressed or when you're sensory overwhelmed. And then the other thing is just generally all of the emotional labor that happens when you're parenting. So you're making decisions all the time about how you're going to respond, what's your tone, what boundaries you're going to hold, how you're going to respond to your kids' emotional needs. So there's just all these different, it's not just decisions about like what are we going to wear or where are we going to go, but it's also like how am I going to parent in this moment? It's all of those tiny decisions. I'm exhausted just talking about it, but I do want to talk about some practical strategies that actually help. So I'm not just going to say just be organized because that doesn't help anyone, but something that I've found really, really helpful is just to reduce the number of decisions that I have to make. And what I mean by that is having defaults. So this is something like work uniforms. I work for New South Wales Health, and I do not have to wear the uniform because I work in a community health setting. So there's no need to wear my uniform. I would just have to wear sort of smart professional clothing. And most of my colleagues choose to do that. But I personally choose to wear the official health uniform every day instead of, professional civilian clothes because it removes one decision from my brain. I have a simplified morning. I do not have to think about what's clean or what looks professional enough or what feels comfortable enough or what's weather suitable or any of that. I just put on my uniform. It helps for me that because of the uniform being what it is, it's basically a polo shirt. It's actually more comfortable than some of the dressier, professional looking outfits that I might have to wear if I were dressing myself. So it's actually from a sensory perspective, it's a more comfortable option for me too. So you can come up with variations on this. So before I actually got the official uniform, I just bought a bunch of basically the same shirt in different patterns, and I would just wear a different one every day with pants. So I was like, great, this is the one that's at the end of the cupboard. I would just pick from what was at the end. So I wasn't actually picking. I just always picked the shirt that was on the end, and I always put my clean clothes back in on the other side. So I sort of cycled through and I just grabbed, this is the shirt that's at the end. This is the shirt that's at the end. Wear it with the same pants every day. So you can either have like an official uniform, like, with a logo or whatever, or you just generate what your outfits are and you just cycle through them. Having your options that are go-to works. So the idea is not to, reduce your personality or anything like that. And this might not work if you're somebody who really cares about what you look like or not repeating outfits, but it really simplifies things, just not thinking about what I'm going to wear that day. I have, the same black socks that I wear every day when I'm going to work. I wear the same shoes every day when I'm going to work. I just do not need to put any thought into it. It's just there. And I have enough of it that I don't need to worry about what's clean or not. So this idea of like having a default setting is something you can do in other things too, not just clothes. You can do it for personal clothes too, actually. Sorry, that's like the idea of a capsule wardrobe is, you know, you just have these things that sort of all go together in whatever combination and you just grab them. So the other things that you can do for default settings. So this might be something like a default breakfast. If you just go, you know what, every day I'm just going to have cornflakes and honey and a cup of tea, and that's your breakfast every day. So some people can't eat the same food again and again and again. Neurodivergent people often can. So take advantage of your ability to deal with sameness if that's something that fits for you, and have a default breakfast. Have your default lunches for the kids. So this is thing, you know, I've got both kids with me on a Wednesday and we go to swimming, and after swimming we go to the same restaurant, we order the same meal at this cafe every Wednesday, and I order a second of it and I have that for my lunch on Thursday, just every week. That's what we do. We have default, like I don't need to think about the brand of the thing that I buy, just buy the same one every single time. Obviously that takes a certain amount of financial privilege to sort of pick a thing and not necessarily have to be worrying about what's on special. But if you are in that financial position to just go, I'm not going to, you know, try and make a decision about what, you know, 10 of diced tomatoes I'm going to buy. I'm just going to buy this brand. It's, yeah, definitely a privileged position. But if you're in that position, take advantage of it. Things like your default laundry settings. So just going, you know, this is the setting I wash my towels on. This is the laundry detergent I use. I'm not making a choice. I know these are the settings I use for this type of load. So it's not one extra decision. So it's not, the idea is not necessarily strict rules if it doesn't work for you. The idea is to have like a template to reduce as many daily decisions as you can. So just throughout the day, be like this. So I have my mug. This is my mug. I only use this mug. It's one of those things that, you know, it might be, you know, the autism talking, but like having a thing that is like something you control and predictable, and the default setting actually reduces this decision fatigue. Because if you sort of get to the cupboard and you're making all these other decisions for your kids as well, like what color plate am I going to give them, and is that going to cause an issue? And if I give that kid the yellow plate and I give the other kid the green plate, is that going to cause an issue? Should I give them both a yellow plate? But if I give them both the yellow plate, then I won't have a yellow plate later for this kid who I know is going to want a yellow plate for dinner too, so I'm going to have to wash it. So all of those things where you just, as much as possible, what can you do to take those decisions away from you? Can you buy another yellow plate so that you're not having to make that choice every single day? And sometimes it's almost like putting more decisions onto you to make that decision ahead of time so that it's not there every single day. So if there are decisions you find yourself making every single day that you don't need to be making. So, I mean, obviously there's always the what's for dinner or anything like that. But as many of those decisions as possible, can you make them once and then stick with that decision? Another thing that really helps is like when you hit that nap, you know, paralysis moment, instead of sitting there and generating all the options, just ask yourself, what is one thing that I will feel good about myself in 20 minutes if I get it done during this time? And just pick the first thing that comes to mind. Like genuinely, if you find yourself in this moment, in this decision fatigue all the time in that situation, yes, I mean, wouldn't it be great to pick the most ideal thing or thing that will have the most positive impact? But if you know that by trying to do that, you're going to get nothing done, just do the first thing. Don't feel guilty about not being the most efficient you can or picking the best thing you can. Just go, well, hey, if I didn't pick this first thing, I'd probably have done nothing. I am going to choose to sit and rest for 20 minutes, because if I don't choose to do it, I'm going to sit there vegging and scrolling anyway, and I'm not going to feel refreshed. I'm going to feel guilty. Oh, I'm going to do the washing now. I'm not even going to think about the fact that later I might go, oh, I wish I'd had a shower. I'm going to do the washing because I will feel good that the washing was done. So breaking that freeze by just going, I know there's so much. I know the next time I'm in this scenario, I'm going to pick the first thing that pops it to the top of my list, even if it's not the most efficient, which I know is hard. It's easier said than done, because it's really easy to want to optimize when you only get a certain amount of time to yourself each day. But you can't do everything. You're not going to be able to do everything. And it is better to do something than nothing. And then the other thing is just when you get that opportunity, pre-decide. So if you feel like you've got all of these decisions during that nap time, come up with like a game plan. For example, like you might think eating is more important than cleaning. And you just decide like, you know what, in that nap time, if I get the chance, I'm going to eat before I clean. I'm going to rest before I do the washing. Connection with the kids comes before chores. Whatever it is that your priorities are, and live with those values, because if you're choosing things based on what your values are, even if you wish you could do both, everyone wishes they could do both. Living in line with your values is going to leave you feeling the least amount of guilt at the end of the day. And those priorities might change week to week or season to season, but sort of in those calmer moments, pre-deciding as much as possible can reduce that like panic when the decision fatigue sets in. Another thing that you might find helpful is to set certain times in the day where you just intentionally just try not to make any decisions. So that might be in the evening for the first 10 minutes after the kids are asleep. You just don't make any decisions. Like you actually do just sit on the couch and just stare into space and dissociate for 10 minutes before you start making decisions. Give yourself that little bit of a buffer from what can often be, I mean, I don't know what bedtime's like in your house, but it's exhausting for most parents that I know. It might be that on your commute, you don't make any decisions. There might be the first 15 minutes of nap times, you always do the same thing. So that's something I've really done, is that when it's nap time, I always take that first 15 minutes to make a cup of tea and sit on the couch every single time. So that's one decision I'm not making because it's pre-made. That is just what I do during that time. But it also just gives me that 15 minutes of rest, so that like subconsciously during that, I'm sort of then like assessing what I might do with the rest of nap time if it lasts longer than 15 minutes. And then I get to that point and then I can make a decision about what to do. But I've had 15 minutes of no decisions to kind of recharge that decision-making ability a little bit. So thinking that it's not procrastinating, what you're doing is you're recovering so that you can make a more effective decision later. Some other things that might help, things like body doubling or parallel productivity. So that idea of like, rather than making a decision, picking like a cleaning podcast or video or something and just going, you know what, I'm just going to copy what they do. So it's one decision. You choose the video. You're like, okay, I'm going to clean the kitchen alongside this body doubling video. But then I'm not sitting there going, well, do I start with the dishes or do I start with wiping the benches or should I clear out the fridge? Like I'm not making any of those decisions within that. I've picked like a video and then I just copy that. So that idea of, podcasts. So I do this all the time. I'll put on a podcast about the thing that I'm doing and then just like follow along with what they say on the podcast. It really can help because there is that decision initially, but then all the minor decisions after that, somebody else is making them for you. Another thing as a strategy that often works on good days is that if a task takes under 2 minutes, just do it immediately, because then that takes away the choice of when am I going to do it. So it's not a rule that you have to do all the time, but just that idea, if you notice something that needs doing and it's going to take less than 2 minutes, the rule when you've got the energy can just be, just do it. And that way you're not sitting there with the back of your mind going, oh, and at some point I need to decide when I'm going to go and do that thing. And then, 100 2-minute tasks build up and it feels like this big overwhelming mess that's just sitting in the back of your mind, draining your energy because you know you've got to get to it eventually. If you just notice it and you go, oh, there are some used tissues sitting beside the couch from when I wiped my kid's nose. If you just go, I'm going to put them in the bin right now as your default, then they're not sitting there reminding you every time you look at them for that whole day. Oh, wait, I do need to do that. Wait, I need to do that. Wait, I need to do that. When am I going to do that? And it's this series of almost decisions in the back of your mind that you can remove just by doing it immediately. I know that one is so much easier said than done. But on the days that I have energy where I do that, I always get to the end of the day and I feel, one, that I've been so much more productive. So I feel a lot less guilty about it. But also my brain does feel clearer. And then as much as possible, when you know that there's going to be something that's hard, like mornings, trying to get 2 kids ready for daycare or swimming or something, what can you do ahead of time to make that easy? So it's things like the work uniform idea, but can you just have like a default snack that you always have when you go to daycare pickup? So you're not thinking about what's the snack. You just go, I'm always grabbing this snack. Or, okay, when I am trying to get ready for swimming and I know it's hard getting everything into the bag, I always put on one episode of Bluey because that gives me 6.5 minutes and that is enough time for me to pack the bag. And I don't need to think about what am I going to entertain my kids with while I do it. That's my default. That's what we do every Wednesday morning. So again, as much as possible, defaults. I've said it. Probably this whole episode could have just been summarized as reduce decisions by having defaults rather than making that decision anew every single time. But I guess most of all, just as much as possible, having self-compassion and realistic supports and using as much as you can of other people, offloading the decisions that you don't need to be making, trying, I know that again, so much easier said than done, but can you divide tasks with your partner or other people in your household so that they are just completely taken off your plate? So there's this idea in Eve Rodsky's book, Fair Play, which I love, which is called conception, planning and execution, which is when you're dividing household tasks with, a partner, the best way to do it is to give the entirety of that task to the other person. So rather than being like, I'm going to write the shopping list, can you go do the shopping and then I'll cook the dinner, where you're giving away some of the tasks, but not really most of the decisions. And if you do that with every single task, then you end up with your finger in every pie, and that's exhausting. So obviously this takes a lot of trust with your partner, but as much as possible going, okay, I'm going to completely offload this task. Like I'm not even going to think about it. It's not my job to do kids' fingernails and toenails. Like you can just go, you know what? I'm never going to be in charge of that. That is your job. It is on you to notice when they need to have their nails cut. It is on you to get their nails cut. It is on you to monitor that, physically do it, but also the noticing, that conception, the idea of whose job is it to notice that it needs to be done. And ahead of time, as much as possible, splitting that as evenly as possible in a way that makes sense. So if your job is, doing the kids, I know that sounds like such a small thing, but it's one of those decision moments that you sort of, if you don't have it clearly defined whose role it is to notice that, you might, if you're the default parent, be like, I'm always the one who notices this. And then I have to sit there and think, when am I going to do that? Oh gosh, what am I going to distract this kid with? I can't really do it when I've got both kids at once because they're too wiggly, or I need, whatever it is that you need to make that task happen. And when you think about that multiplied by literally every moment of parenting, plus managing your own life, like this is obviously not just something that you do as a parent, decision fatigue can hit anyone regardless. So giving the entirety of a task, if it's somebody's job to cook dinner on a Wednesday night, then it's their job to make sure that they've chosen what the meal is, that the groceries have been purchased and are available, and then that they cook it. Like all of that is one person's job. It's not just like, oh, you cook on Wednesdays, but I need to decide what you're going to cook and I need to make sure it's going there, because you're not actually helping yourself by getting rid of any decisions at that point. So yes, sorry, this devolved a little bit into fair play. I will probably talk more about fair play another time because it has been revolutionary in our household for how we talk about and divide things and sort of more equalize our relationship, particularly in the context of parenting, and with the change of me from working full-time to either being stay-at-home during my years of parental leave or working part-time now that I'm back at work. Okay. Enough about that. I want to just get back to decision fatigue and just remind you, if you're feeling overwhelmed by that decision, all of those decisions, you are not alone. You're carrying a lot and you need systems to make life easier, not harder. And I hope that some of the suggestions I've had today really help. Look, if nothing else, if you can get like default clothing options set up that you just grab and go, I promise you it makes mornings so much easier. It makes such a big difference. So give it a go and see how it feels. Next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about things that we can control and how to manage routines and flexibility, because this topic of managing life is something that I'd really like to delve into with you all. So thanks for being here today. Sorry for it being such a long one. I rambled a little bit in the middle there, but I will talk to you next week. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to Not Just Theories. I really appreciate you being here. If this episode resonated with you, the best way to support the show is to follow, leave us a rating or review, or just share this episode with someone else who you think might find it comforting or useful. I hope to see you back here soon.